So, here we are. We're still looking at the genealogy of Jesus. We're in Matthew 1:17 today, even though we're not going to be in there long because we're going to be basically in the book of Jeremiah, seeing some things happening. But here's what Matthew writes for us. And thus there were 14 generations from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile to Babylon, and that's right where we are in the midst of this story, and then 14 from the exile to the Messiah, Jesus, being born. So as we look at this genealogy of Jesus, really it's all about Jesus. It's always, everything in life is about Jesus, folks. It's all about Jesus, okay? And even in the beginning, he's the beginning of the genealogy. He's the end of the genealogy. It says Jesus, the son of Abraham. Jesus, the son of David. It's all about Jesus, okay? But it also, this genealogy gives us a very concise history of Israel and reveals to me just God's greatness and all that God is. God is Redeemer. God is a forgiver. God is slow to anger. He abounds in love. He calls us time and time again to come back to Him. He's our King. He fights our battles. He has a plan, literally this linear plan that goes through history, the history of salvation. And it all culminates in, well, you've heard me say it, Jesus, okay? We've looked at this and we've seen these 42 generations that Matthew gives us at the beginning of his book. And the first period is what's called the patriarchs, Abraham to David. We've looked through that. You remember they made the big circle and brought back home. And there they are. I thought I was cutting out. I don't know. We'll see. And then we're kind of in that second period now of those kings and where they go into Babylon in exile. And it's so interesting because it's in this king stage that they broke the covenant that led to this exile. And remember how this goes, and this is not I guess it doesn't show up very good on this map. It looked good when I put it together in my PowerPoint, but it doesn't look so good now. But at 722, the northern half of the kingdom gets taken over by Assyria, and they're taken in exile. 586, the southern half of the kingdom goes to Babylonia, okay? They're taken into exile there. And if you'll notice up over here where it says the Medo-Persian Empire, they're the ones who take over after Babylon. And that's King Cyrus, and we're going to be seeing that in the next couple of weeks. But you see, they broke the covenant with God. They were living unjustly. They were not living justly like they were supposed to be. They weren't following the law. They weren't loving people. They were worshiping and trusting in these false gods. And in Jeremiah chapter 2, here's what God speaks with a broken heart as he says this. He says, "My people have exchanged their glory, my glory, for a bunch of worthless idols." That was the problem. In fact, he says, my people have committed two sins. Number one, they've left me and forsaken me, the wellspring of living water. Now you have to know this is a dry, arid place. There's not water all over the place, okay? I'm the wellspring of cool, fresh, living water, and they've forsaken me so they can build these cisterns of warm, stagnant water. And they're broken. They don't even hold water. That's what they've done. They've messed up. You see, God revealed himself to Israel not because Israel was so special, but God revealed himself to Israel and this nation because he says, I want you to know who I am. And now what you're going to do is you are going to share with the world all that I am so the world can know me. Because God wants the world to know him, to love him, to worship him. He is God. In fact, he says, I'm going to make you a light for all the nations that my salvation is going to reach to the end of the earth. That's your job, Israel. That's who you're supposed to be. And what they did is they reject God and they begin to follow these stupid cultural deities that are nothing but wood and stone. Man, if they just would have loved God and served God and obeyed God and carried out their mission to share all that God was, God says, man, I'm going to protect you, I'm going to bless you, I'm going to move before you, and all these great things are happening. But instead, they chose to reject God. And as we talked about in the last few weeks, God doesn't bless sin. God doesn't bless rebellion or the worshiping of idols or injustice or doing the opposite of your purpose. And let me tell you, God gave them chance after chance after chance after chance after chance. Are you seeing where I'm going with this? After chance after chance after chance. And they had to learn the eternal truth. You ready for this one? Here's the eternal truth. You're responsible for your choices and your actions. And you're going to have to live with the consequences. Everybody got that? That is a truth in this world. You're responsible. You've got to live. It's what you learned in kindergarten. You made a good choice, good reward. You made a bad choice, not good, okay? You're responsible for it. You see, God brings discipline to wake them up. And in some ways, there's this whole fresh start and a whole revival and renewal that comes out of this. But this is a whole new period for Israel, let me tell you. The exile, and then the return back, and then Jesus being born and Jesus coming about. And the thing that stands out in the midst of this period of the exile, to me, is that God is faithful, and God still has a purpose and a plan. Even in our unfaithfulness, God is faithful. Even no matter what's happening in this world, God has a purpose and a plan. We might not even like what's happening, but God says, I still got a purpose and a plan in the midst of this, and we're going to get this accomplished. You see, the Messiah was going to come out of Israel, and he's here to save the world. Right? As Jesus is born, he's come to free us from sin. He's given us victory over sin, to show us how to live God's love, how to love, how to live the law, how to love, how to help, how to serve, how to live justly. He ushers in the kingdom of God and he brings it to completion. And this is still going to happen. But what we find out today is, man, there are some tough times ahead. Anybody in tough times today? Anybody suffering? Yeah. We all go through these. All of us. And that's the great promise for us today that we're going to get out of this. This is so awesome. But you see, the exile was a very hard time for Israel. It was painful. It was an unwanted time, and it comes with lots of questions when we go through those wilderness hard times, right? And some of those questions are things like, why is this happening? Has God forgotten me? You know, did I go too far this time? Am I too lost to be saved? Can God redeem this situation? Remember, they lived in this happy nation, and all of a sudden a foreign nation has come in and conquered them, taken a bunch of people off into exile. There's a few people who still live in Israel, but they have people living there who are in control over them, and they've got nothing good happening. And there's occupiers that their whole world's different. And God says, I got a plan. Now, it's going to look a little different maybe because we're going to go through Assyria and Babylon and Persia, like we said, but I've got a plan. And even before this whole thing happens, God's already calling them back, calling them to a new covenant, calling them to faithfulness, calling them to revival. And I truly believe this today, as everybody's listening. I believe God is calling us to a recommitment of the covenant that we have with God, and to our faithfulness, and to our wholehearted seeking and living for God. And I think that's what is happening in this story, and I think that's what God is calling for within our lives. Now, here's how it begins. Last week, we ended up with a guy named Hezekiah. He was king. He led a great revival. They renewed the covenant with God. God was blessing them. God was protecting them. Assyria was trying to take over the city. They couldn't do it, and God was just doing great things for them. But behind him, bad times started coming, real bad. Things went downhill very quickly. Babylon is now the world empire. They've taken over Assyria, and they've taken over everything that Assyria had conquered. But Jerusalem itself is a city that is surrounded by a huge protective wall. No one can get in there. Now, Babylon has conquered most of Judah. They can't get into this walled city. In fact, they're already down way south in Egypt and other places still fighting. You see, so they're trying to take over all this land, but they can't get into this city, Jerusalem. But in 605 BC, we find out that the first Jewish exiles are deported to Babylon from Judah. And these were royal people and wealthy people and people with skills and the strong and the young and artisans and all these good people. And we find out that there's a prophet by the name of Daniel. Ever heard of Daniel? Daniel's one of them who is exiled this first time, and he's off in Babylon. 8 years later, another exile takes place, and the second Jewish exiles are deported from Jerusalem and Judah over into Babylon. And there was a guy in there, and his name was Ezekiel. Anybody heard of Ezekiel, the prophet? He's over there now. Now, through a turn of events, they knew the end was coming, okay? And some of the kings were not doing so much. And really, the last king that was there, his name was Zedekiah, and he rebels a little bit against King Nebuchadnezzar from Babylon, and he finally says, that's enough. In 586 BCE, they come in and they wipe out the walls of Jerusalem, they wipe out the city of Jerusalem, they wipe out the temple, and they take a whole nother chunk of people and they bring them back. and they put him in Babylon, okay? That's the story. That's what's happening right now, okay? But here's the most amazing thing. In the midst of it, we see that God still has a plan, even in troubling, tough times. Just because things aren't going the way you want to, just because we're in times that are dark, just because we're in times that are wilderness times within our life does not mean that God is not at work in our lives. God does not love us, and God does not have a plan to bless us and give us a future. In fact, hundreds of years before all this even took place, Isaiah writes this in Isaiah 44. Now remember, Isaiah's writing this, okay? The temple and the city's still there. Everything's fine and dandy at this point. And this is what God says to Jerusalem. You shall be inhabited, the cities of Judah, and you shall be built, and you're going to be raised up from your waste places. In verse 28, he says, I'm going to raise up this king named Cyrus. He's not even around doing anything yet. He's my shepherd. He's going to perform all the things I want him to do. He's going to be saying to Jerusalem, you shall be built or rebuilt, and the temple, your foundation, shall be laid again. See, God had a plan long before. Even Daniel, one of the first ones over to be deported into Babylon, the king over there has a dream, and Daniel interprets it. Says, this is what it is. You're not going to be in power much longer. Cyrus and Persia, they're taking you over, buddy. They knew it. God knew it. God has a plan. You see, God sees what's coming. He's had a hand in bringing it about, and in a linear sense, he's bringing it to a purpose, its purpose to a conclusion, because God's call and God's heart and God's purpose never changes. God's always calling us to faithfulness, always calling us to obedience, always calling us to this right relationship with himself, to love and serve him alone as God. And whether you're far away from God right now or whether you're very close, and whether things are going great in your life right now, or whether you are in kind of a dark, painful wilderness time and you don't understand and you're struggling, whether the hard times that are here are self-inflicted, believe me, we bring about some things ourselves, or whether they're just the fact that we live in a fallen, broken, sin-cursed world, it doesn't matter. Here's the point we got to get today. Is everybody ready? Everybody listening? Everybody's awake, right? Okay. This is faith. We have to believe that God has a plan in the midst of it. God has a plan and a purpose for your story if we trust God. No matter where we are, no matter what's happening, God has a plan. Romans 8:28, what does it say? It says God's going to work things for our good for those who do what? Who love God, whole heart, man, I love God, and are called according to his purpose. Here's your purpose, God. I'm connected into your purpose. I want to do exactly what you want me to do. I love you. And God says, here we go. I'm going to work everything for your good. Not everything that happens in your life is good, but I will work it toward good because that's who I am and what I can do. So here we are today. We're going to take a look at the prophet Jeremiah and some of his words that are given to him by the Lord. And Jeremiah, he's a prophet, but he's also from a priestly family. I love the book of Jeremiah. You know why? Because in the book of Jeremiah, we find out there's a number of different times where Jeremiah complains to God. And I say, I can do that. I can complain. That's good, right? And he does, and he complains to God. And I guess when he does so, it gives me a freedom to be able to say, God, I don't like this. In fact, I hate this right here. I'm here doing your will. I'm trying to follow you and do everything. And life is just stinky right now, and it's yucky, and I don't want it. And God's big enough. He can say, it's okay. I understand that. But I got a plan in the midst of this, so just bear with me as we're going through this, okay? In fact, what I love about God, how he speaks to Jeremiah complains, and sometimes God goes, oh, it's okay, Jeremiah. We're going to get you through this, and we all like that. And sometimes Jeremiah starts complaining, and God basically says, suck it up, buttercup, okay? No, that's Pastor Tom paraphrase. He doesn't say that. But he says this. He says, if you think it's hard now, wait till the real hard times come. You got to get your act together, buddy. And so that's me in my life, and I get that a lot. So here's where it starts. We're going to start Jeremiah 28, and Jeremiah 29 is really the passage we're going to look at. But in Jeremiah 28, there's this false prophet. His name is Hananiah. And Hananiah is speaking because he looks out and he says, hey, you know what? He says, I think Babylon's struggling right now. So what I'm going to say is what the people want to hear. And he says, in 2 years from now, Babylon will fall, and all you exiles are coming home. Man, doesn't that sound great? We all want to hear that, right? We want to have the good news. It sounds good. It's what the people want to hear. When times get hard for us, what do? Man, we want the best of news. We want to hear about healing. We want to hear about all the good stuff that's going to be here. The bad stuff's going to be gone. There's no more suffering. There's no more struggling, right? It's just not that way all the time. See, Jeremiah, who actually hears from the Lord, he says, guess what? Dark times are coming, folks. Dark times. They're coming. So they try to kill Jeremiah a number of times because they don't like the message that he speaks. There's a sermon in there that I won't go to today, but there's a sermon in there. God speaks some truth and we don't like it. We want it our way. The problem is this. What Jeremiah spoke was the truth. It was reality. You see, chapter 29 is a very famous chapter because God gives Jeremiah a letter to write and to send to those exiles who are in Babylon. Jeremiah is still in Jerusalem, and he's sending a letter to those who are in Babylon that are the exiles. And the letter is not, hey, good news, we're all coming home and everything's going back to normal. In fact, the letter is very simple. You better start blooming where you're planted because you're staying. In fact, I know you don't like it there. I know you don't want it. But you're going to have to find the new normal of where you are. And you're going to have to draw close to God in the midst of this time, or you're going to be miserable and you're going to fight against God the whole time. Who wants that? God's present right there in the hard times, he's telling them. In fact, Henry Nouwen puts it beautifully. God is a God of the present, always in the moment. If the moment's hard or easy, joyful or painful, God is present. Now, this is somewhat of a hard passage for you this morning because the passage I'm going to read, Jeremiah 29:11, many of you have heard before. You've heard it numerous times before. And God says, "For I know the plans that I have for you. They're plans for good and not for harm. They're plans to give you hope and a future." And we hear that, and this is what we want it to say to us. We're like, oh, yeah, this is good stuff, but I'm afraid I'm going to burst your bubbles today when I talk about this. But as we reframe this and see it in the proper light of the context of this passage, I hope you love it even more than you do it right now. That when we hear that God has a plan for me and it's a plan for good, here's what it means to us, what we want it to mean. That means all my trouble, all my hardships, all my pain, all my suffering, all wilderness time, it's going to be over soon, and God's going to make me flourish. God's going to take away all the bad and hard stuff. He's going to give me all the good stuff because God's number one purpose for me in my life is that I'm happy and that I'm healthy and that I'm wealthy, right? Isn't that what God wants for me? And I should be preaching that out there on the TV and I'd be a millionaire right now, but I don't, because that's not the reality of it all, is it? You see, this passage is not about escaping our suffering and our pain and our wilderness times and our hard times. It's about thriving in the midst of them with a God who loves us and is very present with us the entire time. Wow. You see, the exiles want to hear, y'all are coming home, but they're told, you're all staying there. I know it's where you don't want to be, but God's got a plan for you. He's got a plan to give you hope and a future, and not only for you, but for the nation as well. And as we find in perseverance in those wilderness and hard times, we find joy and hope and peace in God's presence. So today I'm just going to read this to you. Just a few verses out of Jeremiah 29. Jeremiah 29, verse 1. This is the text of the letter that the prophet Jeremiah sent from Jerusalem to the surviving elders among the exiles and to the priests and the prophets and all the other people that Nebuchadnezzar had carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Here's the letter. See, Jeremiah's still back here. The city's still walled. Temple's still there. Things are still good. A bunch of people are off in exile going, what in the world just happened to us? Verse 4. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what you produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons, give your daughters in marriage, so that they too might have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. In other words, you got to start blooming where you're planted, folks. You don't like it. I know you don't like it. It's not fun there. It's not home. It's a whole new normal. It's okay, but you're going to have to learn to live there and thrive there. Don't just sit there and bellyache and say, woe is me, this is the worst thing I got. And you've got to pick it up and start living and make it happen, even in the hard times. See, these are hard words, aren't they? You got to make the best of it. You got to carry on. You got to find that new normal right here. I'm still here with you, God says. I still have a plan, and I want you to thrive in the midst of this exile and this wilderness time. You see, then it gets even harder. Verse 7, also God says, seek the peace and the prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. What? They're my enemies. They just made me, no way. God says, no. You're a part of them now. You're here. Seek and pray for them. Pray that the Lord will bring about prosperity for them. Because if they prosper, guess what? You prosper. You're a part of them now. Whoa. He's not saying be unfaithful, worship their gods. He's saying be faithful to me, live like you're supposed to with me and the law and love and everything, and be my witness everywhere. But you're there now, and you got to thrive and live in it. He goes on to say, do not let the prophets among you deceive you. Do not listen to these dreams that you're encouraging to have, because they're prophesying lies to you in my name. I have not sent them, declares the Lord. Remember Hananiah? 2 years, you're coming home, come on. No. Oh, here's the best part. Verse 10. This is what the Lord says. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my gracious promise to you and bring you back to this place, Jerusalem. Now, I want you to hear the fullness of what was just spoken, okay? Most of those people there, 20s, 30s kind of thing, you know what he just told them? You're never going home. You're never going back. What? But have kids. Have grandkids. You know why? Because I got a plan for hope and a future. And they're going to be there and they're going to thrive. But right now, where you are, start thriving like you are, because this is the beginning of the plan. But you're not going to get back. It's never going to change. This is where it's going to stay for you. Can you stay focused on me in the midst of this time? Can you stay wholeheartedly loving me in the midst of this time? Whew. Verse 11, here's what you know. God says, for I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and to help you, not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. You see, I'm going to give you hope and a future right here in Babylon. And then for the nation, when we go back, there's hope and a future there as well. But you got to learn to live right here in this waiting time. And in verse 12, he says, then you're going to call upon me and you're going to come and pray to me. And he says, you will seek me and find me when you seek me with all of your heart. And that's where I'm going to be found by you, declares the Lord. Whew. You see, what he's saying is it's a time in the midst of this suffering, in the wilderness, in the exile, in the hardship. We all have them, right? You got to start seeking me hard, wholeheartedly. And I'm going to let you know the plan, and I'm going to let you know the future and the hope that I'm bringing you to. But focus on me. Are you having some hard times right now? Anybody here dark wilderness times? Are you looking for understanding? Are you trying to find your way to this new normal? Are you feeling lost and in exile? God's saying this, stay faithful to me. Live life. You got to live. You got to thrive still. Bloom where you're planted and seek me wholeheartedly. I know you don't like your situation. You know what? It may never change. It might change. I don't know. But we need to be faithful and obedient in seeking God. You know, Lincoln Brewster has a song right now called While I Wait. He's going through a lot of issues himself, the singer-songwriter. But here's what he says. He says, in the midst of long and painful seasons, we wait. We remember that God is always present with us, even in our times of waiting and longing and hoping. He is walking with us through the pain and even in our questions and even in our doubts. When I heard this song the first time, it hit me so powerfully. Here's part of the lyrics of his song. Though I don't understand it, I will worship with my pain. Anybody ever had to worship with your pain before? We do. I don't understand it, but I'm going to worship you with my pain because you're God and you're worthy. You're with me all the way. So while I wait, I worship. I worship your name. Though I don't have all the answers, still I trust you all the same. You are faithful every day, and your promises remain. While we wait in those times. Jeremiah finishes up here, and I'll finish with this, Jeremiah 31:31. And I know this is small, you won't be able to read it probably. But here's this amazing thing that Jeremiah predicts right after this. You see, the city hasn't even fallen yet. And here's what he says. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I'm going to make a new covenant with the people of Israel and the people of Judah. In a few weeks, 4 or 5 weeks, we're going to have a time where Jesus is sitting in his last meal with his disciples, and he takes the bread and he takes the cup. And what does he say? He says, this is my blood of the what? New covenant. It all goes back to Jesus, right? Predicted so long ago, a new covenant I'm making. And it's not going to be like the old covenant. Because in the old covenant, I took them by the hand, I led them out of Egypt, and I was a husband to them, but they totally rejected me. They broke my covenant. But this is the covenant I will make, verse 33, with the people of Israel. I will put my law in their minds so that they know it, and I'm going to write it on their hearts so that they live it. And I'm going to be their God, and they're going to be my people, and I will forgive all their sins and remember them no more. Isn't that the most beautiful thing? I believe this is what God is calling for us right now. He's saying, in the midst of even the hard times right now, I'm calling you for this recommitment to this covenant, to come and just give wholeheartedly and seek God wholeheartedly. Surrender our spirits, obey no matter what. Love God with our hearts that yearn so much for God that his presence in our lives 24/7 is what we need every day. Because the exile and the wilderness are hard, painful times, but God does amazing things in the midst of it. And as we commit our life to follow the Lord, he begins to plant his desires in our heart, and he guides us according to his plan, which is about hope and a future.